Oh, Chinwag. Oh.
Are you okay? You seem
I'm
injured.
okay. I think I need to be alone. What just happened? Oh my God. Wow.
It's that exciting.
Like everything just happened. Yeah, this episode is that exciting that I think I need a little me time. I was having a little me time.
You want to smoke a cigarette?
Yeah, I need a cigarette. I need a vigorous hosing down. Jesus Christ. Oh, yes. Welcome, Steve. Welcome, Dr. Stephen Asma.
Welcome, Paul Giamatti, to the Chinwag.
You, sir, to the Chinwag, to an epic Chinwag.
It is epic.
To a like gigantic Chinwag, to a really
sprawling,
big old sprawling giant Chinwag.
Philosophical,
manly,
spiritual.
Meaty beef stew, just like God almighty.
Beef stew.
Beef stew. Dinty Moore beef stew. Now do we have to get, am I going to offend the Dinty Moore people? I might.
Better
Dinty
get
Moore.
some kind of compensation on that.
Yeah, I better get some sort of, but no, it's a big one. It's a big brawny one with the outstanding, the inimitable, the one and only Stephen Colbert.
Stephen Colbert. Possibly Colbert.
Possibly
well, we
Colbert.
get into that. There's some discussion of his name. Yeah.
You could do it. That's about to happen, folks. But before that happens, we're just gonna harass you with this reminder.
We need to remind you to head on down to Apple Podcasts and to rank and review us. And also hit us up with your letters and your comments. We've been getting some great letters and
amazing
suggestions.
Letters.
Yeah.
Yes. All is welcome. Come on, come all. I don't know. I'm just shouting because I'm so worked up. I'm in such a lather. I'm in such a lather. Without further ado, our next guest. Our only
the amazing.
Guest, the astounding, the interstellar, the cosmic. This is big. This is huge.
Oh, very big.
No, it doesn't get any bigger. Colossal. It's colossal. We are both massive fans of this gentleman. Much of the planet is. He is a great writer.
It's true.
Comedian, performer. You probably know him from comedy late night series that bears his name. But I know him from our shared love of science fiction, Steve. Yeah. And we get into it. We get into
stuff.
Boy, deep into the nerd weeds. We are very thrilled to have him joining us here, Mr. Stephen Colbert.
Nice to meet you,
Stephen. Yeah, Stephen Asma.
Hi,
Stephen Colbert. Yeah. This is
a proper PH, Stephen, too. Good for you.
PH Stevens.
Not this Roman Latin thing. The Greeks, that's the
Hold the line.
Thing.
Hold the line.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, it is. It's the Greek.
Is it a Greek and
It's
Roman
Saint
thing?
Stephen was the first martyr.
Yeah. The stone.
First martyr?
Yeah.
Really?
That's right.
When I was a little boy.
What does that mean? Now, hold on. What does that mean? The first
he was
martyr.
the first saint or first person killed because he was a Christian.
His beliefs. Really?
You're right. And he was
first person
Antioch,
on record.
Right?
First person
on record.
Surely there must have been other guys killed for that.
And I think it was
that didn't make the grade.
I think it's Stephen of Antioch. And great place to be from, by the way, Antioch. It sounds like, a god of chaos, Antioch.
True.
But, and when I was a little boy, I had on my wall a little icon, and it shows it's Stephen. He's on his knees praying. There's a stone next to him on the ground. He's got him in an end space, but there's a stone next to him on the ground and a little blood coming down his forehead.
Oh, man.
And so that was my role model.
Amazing.
I was raised Catholic. We had this big Bible, and there were these paintings in there, and there was a painting of Saint Stephen, and it was super inspiring because I was Stephen. It was like this crazy kid identification.
I could take it.
Did they
throw your stones?
Did they stone him to death? This was back when
they stoned him to death. That's back when that was
early
old school.
Ones. Right. I was going to say this is before they figured out they could do all this other shit to them.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yes.
All the other stuff they could do. That's fascinating. I've never
Just a good old rock.
Yeah. I've never even really thought of the difference. See, I've never thought that, oh boy, I just thought it was it's orthographically, is that the word I'm looking for? Easier to do a V than a PH. I just thought it was this is quicker. Well, this is already incredible. This is already really.
Okay, this is it.
This is already.
If this is the standard of conversation for Chinwag, then I'm in the right place.
This is absolutely it. Welcome, Stephen Colbert. Thank you so much. Where are you currently located?
I'm in New York, the big city of dreams.
And do you do you also go back down south quite a bit?
Yeah, my Evie and I have a place right across the street from her sister and a block away from her 94-year-old dad. And so I've been down there with my family and catching some fish.
Nice.
Are you from the South originally?
Evie and I grew up around the corner from each other in Charleston, South Carolina.
So I don't detect a drawl, or there isn't such a thing. Or you were in Chicago for a long time.
I was in Chicago for 11 years, yeah. I think Charleston accent's a little different. Like a real Charleston accent is very beautiful. Like her father is old school. They're Charleston from like 1700.
Wow.
And he's got the really old accent.
Is that the kind of classic? Is that the soft mint julep kind of thing on the porch kind of thing? Is it that? Is it that sort of
well,
thing?
Charleston accent's very interesting. It's sometimes called a Southern New England accent. And it's the Low Country was what the area is called, the Low Country of South Carolina. It's got a very distinct accent that is influenced by the Geechee Gullah accent of the the Sea Islands of South Carolina.
Yes,
but these very isolated communities whose accent and to a certain extent grammar is related to West African and Scottish. Sort of Scottish because the overseers were Scottish.
Yes,
and English, and in those communities it's sort of dying out because people leave the islands.
Yeah.
But it's a very distinct, very beautiful language with its own vocabulary and everything. And those people back in the old day were like the nannies and everything for the white families in town. And so that accent became sort of ubiquitous. That influence was ubiquitous across cross-culturally in South Carolina.
So you get that weird New Englandy sound a little bit. So it has something that sounds that's like
you get like like married. You don't get married, you get married.
Interesting. That's fine. And that's a bit like that Cajun thing that sounds like New Jersey or something, because there's probably there's that weird Cajun accent when I'm like, no, surely you're from like Queens. You can't be from like Louisiana, but it's that very weird accent. So it must be a similar like weird mashup of things.
Yeah, I love the New Orleans thing of like Hoyd. Have you heard the news?
Yeah, have you heard it? Yeah, have you heard it? Which is like, but again, it's probably an Irish thing or something like that, or something.
Maybe.
Blew my mind when I found out that the whole a lot of the sort of accents from the Caribbean are influenced by the Irish overseers.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but it's a similar thing because it was it was all being run by those guys.
But your name, Stephen, like my mom, who's 82, was like, you're gonna interview that Stephen Colbert. And I was like, yeah, Mom, Colbert, right. What's the pronunciation of your name with regard to the
That's a great question. Background? And it depends on what member of my family you're asking, because my father was a junior, James W. Colbert Jr., and
it was Colbert.
He wanted to be Colbert, the French pronunciation of the name. And his father said, but you're a junior. If you go with Colbert, it's like you don't really want to be my son. and so my father said, okay, fine, I'll be Colbert. But he said to all of us, and I'm one of 11 kids in my family, and he said to us, like, well, do whatever you want. And so some of us are Colbert, some of us are Colbert.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And there are a lot of lawyers. And so the family joke is that it's the law firm of Colbert, 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 and Colbert.
Genius. Fantastic.
But I was actually, I went to college in Virginia, a place called Hampton City for a couple of years, and I sort of toyed with Colbert there. And then I transferred to Northwestern University to go to the theater school. And I had never been to Chicago. I had never been to Northwestern. I was just going on reputation and recommendation. And on the plane, I had been bumped up to first class. I was flying through DC. There was a storm. I'd been bumped up to first class. I'd never been in first class before. And the man sitting next to me was going to Los Angeles to give a talk on what was then fairly new, cutting edge F-18 fighter plane. And he had this big schematics he was going over next to me and I was like, what is that? And he was explaining to me what it is and what he had to do. And I said, do you fly those? He goes, I fly something a little bigger. And I said, what do you fly? And he goes, I fly the space shuttle.
What?
Holy shit.
And I said, what? And he goes, I've never flown it. He goes, but I'm in the I'm in the next astronaut class.
Sure.
Because they do it like,
yeah,
like
every
3 or 4 years or something like that. There's a new class.
Yeah, it's a new class. Yeah.
I'm in the next astronaut class. I think his last name was Corley. The next astronaut class. And I said, and at the time, the International Space Station, which I think was already up there, but a small version of it was up there. There was a problem up there, and they weren't telling us what it was. And I said, "What's the problem?" And he goes, "The urine dump is frozen." Like the space cock, like the thing, the valve that is like that. Well, it froze in the valve. It froze as it was going out.
Sure.
And I said, so what do they do? He goes, they're peeing in bags and tossing it out the window.
Oh my God! So, putting it in the airlock and just releasing it into.
Of course, I'm absolutely beside myself with the joy of sitting next to this guy. So he goes, so why are you going to Chicago? And I said, I'm going out to theater school for the first time, and I don't know anybody there. And he goes, wow, amazing thing. So like, what do you anticipate? He said, well, I'm trying to figure out whether to go Colbert or Colbert. And I told him the whole story. Sure. I said, this is my chance because nobody knows me there.
Yeah. Right.
That's cool.
And I'm also going to try to go be a performer for a living. And I said, I'm not sure what to do. And he goes, you already know what you want to do, or else you wouldn't be talking to yourself like this. So I got on the plane as Colbert, and with the help of an astronaut, I got off as Colbert.
That is fantastic.
So that's why it's Colbert. But if you wake me up in the middle of the night and slap me across the face, I might say Colbert.
That is a Gatsbyan, that is an American story about how that is really amazing. You have a connection to Looking Glass, which I didn't know. To the Looking Glass Theater.
I just did their gala fundraiser out there.
I saw that, and I know Mary Zimmerman. I don't mean to just be throwing names around, but do you know her at all?
Thud. Yes, I know Mary Zimmerman.
Way to name drop.
She was a graduate student when I was an undergrad. She was. We took one class together, or she came in and did a presentation as a graduate student for Leland Roloff's class.
Wow.
Do you know who Leland Roloff was?
No, but that's a fantastic name.
Yeah,
is that an acting teacher?
He was an acting, he was interpretation of literature, because NU has this inter program, which back in the day was a little different. Today, it's a little bit like analysis of, I don't want to say what it is, but it's analysis of like the history of performance in some ways. Yes,
I get it.
But back then, it was literally like adapting literature. And so I took a interp class with this guy named Leland Roloff, who was a Jungian analyst.
Oh,
perfect.
Great. Yes. And the class was called Archetypal and Psychological Approaches to Literature.
Fantastic.
And just something in me went, ping.
That's our subtitle.
I was a transfer student. And so my little sad story, I would tell all the professors, because I only had 2 years there. I came as a junior. And I would go in. I was also lazy. So I would never like make the sign up in time. I was never the guy who got there early to sign up for the right classes.
Sure.
What I would do is I would show up for the class I wanted on the first day, whatever the class was, and say, and then afterwards I would say to the professor, I would say to him or her, I would say, hi, my name's Stephen Colbert. I'm a transfer student. I've only got 2 years here. I really want to take your course, but I'm afraid that I only have half as much chances to take your courses as a 4-year student. I was wondering whether I could just drop in, because I'm afraid I'll never get another chance to take your course. And everybody signed it. Everybody did it. Everybody did it. But Lee Roloff did the best. Lee Roloff, I gave him my little song and dance. And I hadn't quite finished with my little song and dance. And he turned to me and he said, and you're looking for someone to understand. And I said, yeah. And he said, and he held out his hand so I could hand him the drop ad slip.
Sure.
And he said, I will be that person. And that's what Leland Roloff was like.
Amazing.
Leland Roloff. Well, I'm sorry, I can't stop. When they got me on Leland Roloff, this is your
Keep
damn
going,
fault, Giamatti.
No.
So Leland Roloff I have two more Leland Roloff stories that are worth telling.
Please.
I have
No,
three.
please.
I have three
No.
worth
The whole
telling.
thing can be about Leland Roloff.
Yes.
Okay.
The name alone, I just like hearing you say it over and over. Was he was a Jungian psychoanalyst?
Yes,
So that's what he did. Okay.
A practicing, well,
good.
he was a professor. He was like a full tenured
I understand
professor
that, but he was
of intern, but he also had a practice in Evanston, Illinois. I actually went for one day.
That was the other thing I was going to ask was, did you go get any analysis?
I did. Okay, so
I've always wanted to do Jungian analysis.
For those of you who are listening, it's like very interesting to delve into Jungian archetypes and the power thereof.
Indeed.
Yes.
And whether or not you are tapping into something primal, eternal, and passed on from generation to generation, or that somehow has a spiritual or godly component, or whether or not we are merely hardwired for certain reactions to certain imagery and ideas. Mm-hmm. Either one of those, it's real. Yeah. It's real.
And it's fascinating.
It's real. So Lee Roloff. So he was, practicing Jungian analyst, and we talked about archetypes a lot, and we studied Grimm's fairy tales and the Homeric hymns and other things too, but that'll start
Star Wars.
Well, we did. We talked about Star Wars.
Yes, why not?
And so one day he would lecture like this. He would talk and he would speak, but sometimes he would close his eyes.
He's one of
and
those
nod
guys.
his head as he lectured and wouldn't look at anyone. And one day, just one day, let's say this guy named Robert in class says, "Hey, professor, can I ask a question?" He goes, "Yeah. How come you close your eyes sometimes when you lecture?" And we all went, "Wow, that's a good question.
Really good question.
That's a good question." We didn't realize that we were all asking that question, but hadn't thought to form it.
Yeah, thank you, Robert.
And I don't know whether I would have had the balls to ask it.
Yes.
And he said, "There are times when I am lecturing on the material that I've asked you to read. And this material is so integral to the human experience and so deep in our collective unconscious that if I were to look at you at that moment when I was talking about that subject, you would think that I know your secret. But I don't, Robert. Come on. Shave your head. Shave your head. Get on the compound. Eat the grain.
Exactly.
Wear the robe. Whatever you want to do.
Wake up. Go pray.
I'm in that cult. I'm in that cult.
Yeah.
I'm selling
Sign
flowers
me
at
up.
the airport.
Sign me up.
Handing out the literature, the whole thing. That is
So I'll tell you
amazing.
I'll tell you one more Leland Roloff story. So, and this goes back to fishing. Okay, because we were talking about fishing. I don't know if they got recorded, but we started off talking about what I've been doing. I fished a lot with my father when I was a child, and I still really enjoy it. But it was very important to my childhood with my father. Did a lot of fishing. And I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. Caught my own fish, clean my own fish, cook my own fish. It's very important to me. Netted, cast, cane pole, you name it, I did it.
Cane pole, wow.
Yeah. And
that's old school.
I grew up on a little pond, but also was right by the harbor and the ocean. And anyway, tidal creek's fantastic.
Bass? Are you catching bass?
What are you catching?
Trout?
What are you fishing?
What are you catching?
Catching brim, which people call bream, B-R-E-A-M, but we say
That's what I would have
brim.
called it. Got it.
We say brim because of southern brim.
Sure.
We catch brim in freshwater, a lot of catfish, eels, a lot of I go crabbing, catch a lot of crab, catch a lot of shrimp. Catch a lot of shrimp. Catch a lot of redfish, trout.
Those are with like the cages. You catch the crab with the crab cage and all that stuff.
Or you can do drop nets with chicken in there, and they'll come in and you pull them up. Or the best way is just take a string and tie a chicken neck to it, put it in the water, and then slowly pull it back up. And you'll see the crab as he approaches the water. He's like trying to get that chicken neck. He holds onto it with one claw, and then you just net him before he knows what's going on.
Amazing.
And you can catch a ton of crabs like that. So we're reading The Fisherman and His Wife, I think is the Grimm fairy tales, Fisherman and His Wife. And it's one of the ones where wishes are granted.
Yes.
And so the fisherman catches a flounder.
Yes.
And
is it a talking flounder? Does the flounder say
it's a
"Let me
talking
go and I'll
flounder"?
get you"?
Exactly.
It's a talking flounder. Nothing like the old talking flounder.
Exactly.
No, I mean,
let
seriously.
me go and I'll grant you.
Yes.
I don't know if it says grant you 3 wishes,
It's
but let me go
something
and
about
I'll
wishes.
grant you
Yeah.
wishes.
Yeah.
It is wishes, but I don't know how many. But in this story, there are 3 wishes. And so he goes like, okay, give me the biggest house in town. And the fish says, go home to your wife. It is already so. So he goes home. They got the biggest house in town. She's like, oh my God, did you see the neighbor died and we got the whatever? Like it happened. It's already happened when he gets there. It's like, wow. And he tells his wife, and his wife says, really? Well, then go ask for bags of gold or whatever like that. So he goes back and he says to the fish, bags of gold. And the fish says, go home. It's already so. Goes home. She's like, I was digging in the backyard and I was planting the potatoes and look at all this gold I found. And it was like, oh, that's great. And so she goes like, go ask to be the king. So he goes back and asks like to be the king. And I'm not exactly sure what else the fish says, but the fish says, go home. It's already so. So he goes home and they've lost everything. The gold's gone. The house is gone. And it's just him and his wife again. And that's the story. Now,
It just ends.
I think I'm probably leaving some shit out there. So
Maybe, but that's interesting.
if any Grimm fans are out there, okay.
Yeah. Oh, we'll
Okay.
get
We'll hear
letters.
from 'em.
We'll get letters.
Yeah,
We'll get letters.
So, but anyway, that day, Lee Roloff had brought in another Jungian to co-teach with him. That's actually the day they were talking a lot about Star Wars and shit like that. But this co-Jungian, a shorter man, not quite so stately looking. Lee had a beard like this and this white mane of hair.
Absolutely.
And just bestrode.
Just a
evidently.
magus. He was just a,
Evidently, I heard from people who had been there before that when he was a young professor there, like the women swooned when he walked down the hallway.
Right, absolutely.
And so he had an archetypal
talk about
masculinity.
An archetype. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It had a lion quality.
Heavy animus. Yeah. Just a heavy animus.
And so the other professor, they saying like, and let's consider what type of fish this was. It's a flounder, because every detail is super important, obviously.
Sure.
It's a flounder. But I don't know what got us to that conversation, and he says, a flounder, a fish that spends its entire life on its side, on the bottom, with 2 eyes, looking up at the rest of the world.
That's right.
And the oddness of that fish, it's flat and all that kind of thing like that. And I raised my hand and I said, but flounders don't spend their whole life like that. And Lee Roloff said, what do you mean? And I said, flounders start off high in the water column and they're round fish like everybody else. And the eyes are on both sides. The eyes stay stable and the fish rotates as it matures.
And the eyes
comes over. You might think the eyes stay level and the fish rotates around the eyes.
Later in life, like this happens later in its life cycle.
Very early on.
Really?
But when it reaches maturity, it's on its side.
And
flat.
then it just rests on
and
the
it starts
bottom?
feeding lower and lower in the water column until it reaches maturity, it lives on the bottom. But it starts off like other fish.
Wow.
Now, we're talking tiny, we're talking little flounders. You have to catch them like in a net at that stage. But you can catch them at different stages of that.
But you're educating these bookish guys about the real natural history of the
professor. Hey, professor.
Lee Roloff says, how do you know this? And I said, well, I've been fishing since I was a little boy, and we caught a lot of flounders at different, I read a lot of books on it because I read the Saltwater Fisherman's Bible. And I know all about the life cycle of a flounder. And also you can, when there's really tiny, you can net them at that size.
Experience.
And these 2 guys look at each other. And the shorter knew the other Jungian goes, well, this changes everything. I don't know what it changed. I have no idea what it changed. All I know is that I changed everything by telling them that.
Right.
And Lee Roloff looks at me. He looks at me and looks in the class and goes, this is the power of experience.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
The other Jungian went and hung himself immediately, like just
totally slitting their wrists. Just completely.
He opened a taco stand.
Yeah, wow. But that's beautiful. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's cool.
It was nice. Yeah, I love that story. I remember thinking, I was a young man. I was 20, 21.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh, these simple experiences of my life have a
Are
value
significant, hugely
that
significant.
this person who I admired so much found shockingly revelatory for some reason, and also connected this simple and kind of eternal through human existence act of going to fish.
Yes,
Made it linked me to the experience of that person who told that story in Dark Ages Germany.
This folk tale. He just
it
involved
connected us.
Yeah.
It connected me to the folk.
To the folklore of the whole thing.
Which is kind of also related to how, like, why I didn't want to know what sex my child was. I wanted that experience.
To be
I wanted to have the same experience all my ancestors had in that moment.
Exactly.
And also what I find, one of the things I find valuable about my Catholicity, my Catholicism, is that it is so tied to old imagery and ideas. And that's what I like about it, is that the mass I'm hearing, especially if I hear it in Latin, is the mass I would have heard from 312 on.
Can I ask you about your Catholic orientation? I know your faith is really important. We were going to hit you with the heavy stuff.
My orientation is lawful good. I happen to be.
Well, okay.
We wanted to open with Sasquatch.
Yeah, we wanted to ask about
We're already
Bigfoot, but let's
at
do the Catholic
thing, which is great. We really wanted to just do Sasquatch, but go ahead, Stephen, because I was not raised Catholic. I was raised with nothing. So it's like all of this is always, and I'm the Italian. I know.
But
I feel none of it.
When I go to Italy, I feel more Catholic than ever, because I was raised Catholic, but I'm fairly agnostic. I'm a huge fan of Catholicism, but it's the aesthetics and the history of Catholicism is a huge deal for me. Like, it's very important. And I guess what I want to ask you is, my grandmother was sort of like pre-Vatican Catholic, so she would ask me to come and we would pray for the communists. What do you think?
Pray for the conversion of Russia. What of Our Lady of Fatima tells us to do.
We totally would do it. But what do you think about other religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism? Do you think these guys are confused, or they're wrong, or, how do you position your own faith with regard to other faiths? Does this make sense?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't position my faith in regard to someone else.
Then.
No. But there's a second half to that, because I know what you're asking, or rather, I hear a question that I have an answer to in there, which is I don't actually position my faith in relation to other faiths. I was raised, by an intellectual Catholic dad who was very into French humanism, like Léon Blois and Jacques Maritain, like Catholic humanist thinkers.
Teilhard de Chardin and guys like that.
The most certain evidence for the presence of God is joy is the most certain evidence of the presence of God. Teilhard de Chardin.
Right. Yeah,
exactly.
Teilhard de Chardin, all that.
Yeah.
But kind of he was excommunicated, I think, wasn't he? Or
was he eventually? I don't know. Or was he?
Well, they didn't
for too much joy.
Well, but also he was accommodating evolution, which was really cool. He was sort of like finding a way to accommodate evolution.
But at the time,
yeah, but I think if he was excommunicated for that, they must have like
excommunicated is too strong. I misspoke. He
wasn't welcome.
They didn't
to
like
the party.
that he published The Phenomenon of Man, because they thought this is too scandalous compared to the traditional. That was all.
Yes. Yeah.
Theologically.
Well, that gets into like the intellectualism of the Catholic Church that is like, the Big Bang was first the idea was first put forth by a Jesuit.
Oh, really?
Oh.
Yeah.
Say more about that. I did not know this.
I don't know his name, but it's literally the idea of the Big Bang was originally, there was a Jesuit astronomer.
And
and the church didn't crush it. They were like, sure.
They didn't.
No, they were like, okay, that's let there be light. Like they kind of worked their way already to that. This might have been post Teilhard de Chardin. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, really?
This is 20th century. This is 20th century, not 18th, but not 19th century.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
But anyway, Go ahead.
Do you know
please.
the whole story of the cheese? No, let me just. Do you know the whole story of the cheese and the worms? The guy who the illiterate medieval Miller who postulated the idea of the Big Bang and almost like quantum mechanics. Have you ever heard that whole thing?
No.
It's a great book you should read. It's a book by a guy named Carlo Ginzburg, and he was an actual guy who taught himself. He was taught how to read, and he read the Bible, and he intuited a whole idea about the Big Bang. And he was killed. The Inquisition tried to get him to renounce his beliefs.
Wow.
But he wouldn't. And it's a sort of, but it was but it was told almost like a folk tale, the way he was like, the world is like a cheese filled with worms. And it was this whole thing. All these tiny worms are at operation and the everything we can see in space is like the cheese. I mean, it's this crazy sort of like.
Well, that almost sounds like string theory, like the
yes,
worms are.
it does.
Yeah.
No,
By the way,
does.
have you guys seen Oppenheimer yet?
No.
So I saw it, and it's profoundly powerful and heartbreaking and beautiful and frustrating and ecstatic. There's ecstasy, the ecstasy of discovery,
Sure,
the ecstasy of like achieving the quanta.
Yeah.
Like he really captures
That's great.
the trembling before the discovery.
I would love to see something that shows sort of scientists at work, scientists in the process of discovering, like in a real way.
You're going to love it.
Yeah, that would be really cool, because I don't feel like people ever capture that very well.
Well, the deepest moment of it he captures is oddly, for me, the moment is Oppenheimer breaking glasses in the corner of his room when he's studying the quanta in I think in Germany. He's shattering glasses in the corner of the room, and there's a look on his face, and I went, I recognize that look.
Really?
Which is just chasing an idea that is inside of you, and you're perceiving flashes of it outside in the world.
Wow.
And you're like, how do I get
the two things right?
How do I match my desire for that knowledge and my flashes of the insight? And he captures that.
Amazing.
It's incredible. I think it's his greatest film.
But now I want to steer you back though to the question of the Catholic and the Buddhism, because you were going to answer that.
So when I was traditional Catholic upbringing, father intellectual, mother mystical, very heart-filled Catholic,
pious.
Dorothy Day.
Fantastic.
Great.
I love Dorothy
Catholic
Day.
worker.
Absolutely. Is that liberation theology? Does that eventually lead to sort of liberation
theology is more like
something
Oscar
else?
Romero and it's a sort of a Latin American idea, but it's certainly you might say it's like a proto-communist idea, but but they're related. But anyway, my mother was, and she was I don't know, read mystical Catholicism. I don't know how to describe it. Not that Dorothy Day is mystical, but she was much more
of the heart, not the brain. More of the heart.
Well, yeah, exactly. The flagellants remain on a hill in Spain beside the Alcazar. And and she was all into like sure, flagellation.
Wow,
hair
really?
No, she was not really. Not really. Not really. But you know what I mean?
Like pebbles in her shoes and stuff.
No,
like that?
I would say that my mother was a little attracted to what I would call a Hispanic level of Catholicism.
Yeah,
that a Latin level of Catholicism that involved
the passion
of the
passion
Christ.
of it. Yeah, the passion
exactly,
of it.
and the Christ on the cross with the blood and all of that.
Amazing.
And which came in handy when my father and my brothers died, to be able to embrace,
of course,
the suffering,
the literal suffering.
To embrace the literal suffering and to feel like you have nothing but the suffering, and that still must be enough to be grateful for.
Amazing.
Okay. But so I had that. And brothers and sisters, everybody's Catholic. And I was an altar boy for 11 years. And then I get to college and I become convicted of my atheism. Not agnostic, atheist.
Atheism.
And I'm not happy about it. This is not a
Why? What happened? What triggered the atheism? Just being around a bunch of eggheads and
that's college.
Was it college?
I don't know.
Seriously.
It had something to do. It had something to do with the death of my father and my brothers. They had died when I was 10, and here I am off to college. It's completely unaddressed grief, completely unaddressed.
Sure.
And then I get to college, and I remember I was taking this class called Western Man.
Okay.
It was like the great book series at Columbia or something like that. It was Western. You read everything from like
Plato.
You read like, well, no, before like Gilgamesh, but like, you read
sure.
You read like the Iliad and the Odyssey up through like Locke and Hobbes. Like that's basically how far you got.
Sure.
And then at the very end of it, the freshman year, we popped into the Holocaust and we read Holocaust literature.
Oh, okay.
And I remember reading Out of the Whirlwind, which is a series of things that were written actually in the camps.
In the camps,
camps. And I remember us talking about what are we learning about God? What are we learning about? What are we learning about man? And what are we learning about man's relationship to God? Because a lot of it is about man's relationship with God in these stories, in these essays and stories that people wrote.
It's a deal breaker. Holocaust is a deal breaker for many people. Yeah.
Right. And I remember somebody in the class saying, maybe this is God's way of teaching man how evil he is, meaning man. And I said, well, what a way is God's teaching us how evil he is? Pointed at God. And I remember that being integral to my feelings at the time.
Right.
Okay. And so, but that went on for years. So all of college. And then I got very interested in, I don't know, I read the Book of Mormon. I read chunks of Upanishads.
Wait a second. Did you get through the whole Book of Mormon?
I did not. I promise you I did not.
I think I broke down in the Book of Nephi.
I barely got through the Bible.
Okay.
I barely got through the Bible. I mean, the Old Testament's challenging. You know, when you get into the later
But it's
Maccabees.
got a lot of good stuff in it, though. Yeah, but the Old Testament's
and also
got
it's
all those
familiar.
Good.
But I read like chunks of the Mormon Bible, the Book of Mormon. I read chunks of the Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita. I read like layman Buddhism, like is it T.Z. Suzuki or
Suzuki.
DT Suzuki, you know, stuff like that.
Yep.
And bits of the Quran, but you know, as Heinlein reminds us in
which one?
Shit. Heinlein reminds us in Stranger in a Strange Land that reading a translation of the Quran is like kissing a woman through her veil.
That's
great, Bob.
So then you learned Arabic so that you could.
Well, I should have. You know what I mean?
So you can get the veil off. You learn Arabic.
Exactly.
So you can tear the veil aside.
By the way, Heinlein. Oppenheimer teaches himself Dutch in 6 weeks so he can lecture at The Hague.
Yeah.
Okay. So
come on.
I heard about
so anyway,
I heard about that.
But anyway, so then I'm walking down the street one day in Chicago, and I've graduated, and I guess I'm super unemployed or something. I'm probably waiting tables, and it's such a cold day, and there's a Gideon on the street, and the Gideon has given me, you know,
gives you a Bible.
New Testament Proverbs and Psalms, that little green little thing with the gold on the edge.
Yeah, I remember those,
And it was so cold that I had to snap it on my knee to get it to open.
Wow.
Because whatever little bit of moisture was in there had seized it shut.
A little block of ice.
Because it's like 10 or 10 below, you know. And I snap it, open it up, and it immediately it opens to Matthew 5. So I say to you, do not worry, for who among you by worrying can change a hair on his head or add a cubit to the span of his life? And I had this experience, and the experience was, you know, the phrase, wow, that really speaks to me. I was not reading it. There was no action on my behalf. I read the sermon. I stood there in the freezing cold in Chicago, and I read the sermon from the Matthew sermon.
Sure.
And I was never the same.
Really?
It spoke to me, and I thought, something is being told to me. The effect this is having on me right now would be foolish for me to. Wisdom is lost on those who will not act wisely, and I don't want to pass this opportunity by and examine what just happened to me. It's not like I'm like, that's it, Jesus is God or whatever. I wanted to examine that feeling I just had. And the more I examined it in the days to come, I thought like, well, you're interested in lots of different things. You're interested in Buddhist ideas of suffering. And you're interested in
which are
how all kinds of different people approach the idea of a Godhead and what our relationship is to the world as a result. And I thought, but you know what? You're already so far down. Maybe, let's just say, I said to myself, maybe every path is right. Maybe I'll accept that. I'll accept that. I'll accept in my premise, without declaring it, I will accept as a premise that every path is right. And I went, if that's the case, if that's like, so the most ecumenical feeling you can have here, which I enjoy, I thought, you're already so far down this path. You already know so much of your Catholicism.
Raised Catholic,
But now let's examine your Catholicism. And for my entire life now, I have approached my Catholicism, getting back to the waterways of South Carolina.
Yeah.
Our oysters don't come in singles. They come in clusters. They grow in clusters on the banks, like real oysters naturally do. When you get singles, they're generally farmed, but they grow in these clusters, and they grow over decades in these clusters. And if you go chop some off the bank, which you can just go do if the season's right in South Carolina, you take it home and you hose it off and you steam it open and you get your gloves on and your oyster knife and you work your way through that aggregate. Some of those are going to have this beautiful sweet meat in it, and some of it's just going to have mud or a crab or be empty, and they've been empty forever, for like 20 years. But some of them will have that beautiful meat in there, and some more than others. And I perceive that as my approach to the Catholic Church, which is the Catholic Church is this aggregate of traditions. And I like seeing the ancient nature of those traditions. There's something to be learned from seeing this architecture of that build, if you know what I mean. Take the core sample of the human yearning, if you look through the history of the church. And then I eat the things that don't have mud, if you know what I mean. I eat the oyster, something else. I was raised to believe that I could disagree with my church and still be on certain aspects and still be a Catholic. Well, and there's a name for that kind of Catholic, and it's a Protestant.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
So that's your answer. That's a long version. That's your answer.
But what's really beautiful, what I love about that, though, is that really you're reaching back into your own personal mythology. You're looking at all these things and saying these are all possible, but I really ought to, not only have you been so far down the road, it's something, you're reaching back to something essential in your own personal archetypal story, in a way. You know, the fishing and all of it goes back to something. So it's beautiful. It's like, it makes sense. You go back to something and pull it back up into the present. Right. Makes perfect sense. I didn't have any kind of, I had no religion, nothing like that at all.
The Giamattis?
Yeah. Well, but I was raised by
A. Bartlett did not have any?
No. I was raised by I would say he probably was an atheist. He was certainly a pretty strong agnostic, probably verging an atheist, but it was such an opposition to organized religion that it just wasn't even talked about. I wish I knew. So I've always felt the lack of any kind of this kind of thing to reach back to.
Haven't you got kind of a contact high?
I've gotten
from
contact
all the reading
guilt.
You've done.
I have contact sin, and I have contact guilt. I have all of that. I have all the contact stuff. It's like I was raised one. So I think it does actually make the Catholic Church very interesting to me. And the intellectual part of it's really interesting to me. And those kinds of, the guy I really like that is G.K. Chesterton.
Oh, the best.
Catholic, and what I really like about him, and this is a thing I think is really cool, and it was something I was going to ask you, the difference between belief and faith. And that belief seems like it's something that needs to be sort of, you can have some means to prove it, but faith is, there's nothing to prove it necessarily. And what I really liked about him was he was constantly talking about the absurdity of faith, the paradox of faith, Kierkegaard, the contradiction of it, but almost like a Zen thing. Just, it makes no sense. And that's actually the wellspring of faith. That actually, the fact that it is utterly absurd is why it's
Last night I went to go see the Broadway premiere of Here Lies Love, which is David Byrne and Fatboy Slim's opera, really, about Imelda Marcos, and it's very beautiful. Amazing. And it's at the Broadway Theater at Broadway and 53rd, right across from the Ed Sullivan. And I'm listening to the music, and I'm listening to hear my talking heads in there. Do you know what I mean? I'm looking to hear the influence, and there's some, but it's actually it's its own thing. And I think they developed it in 2011 to the public. And I'm thinking about, I heard one, I went, I could kind of see that could have fallen into the stop making sense era. And then I went, stop making sense. And I went, God, that was such a powerful tour. Yeah. It was such a powerful, it was like the breakthrough for them. They were already big in an indie sense, but that when they became superstars, and they didn't last much longer after that, but they became these superstars after that. And I remember, then I sat there looking down at the play. There was a moment of sort of a dance break, and I just had a moment to think without absorbing content, if you know what I mean. And I went, God, that's so powerfully appealing to me. to stop making sense.
Yeah, right.
Because all of your sense has, logic has its own power, but the supposition at the base of the logic is like the seed crystal that can take you in 1,000 miles away from the destination you were looking for. But the emotional response that comes when you stop making sense is almost always true.
Right.
And
right.
And making sense doesn't always mean the truth, but when you stop making sense, somehow there's a purity to your experience and your reaction to the world. And anyway, the fact that you just said that reminded me that I just had that thought last night.
Oh. Well, that was something else, wasn't it, Steve?
Yeah, that was crazy.
Holy cow. We got so deep into it. We got so deep in the weeds of joy with Stephen Colbert that we actually ran out of tape. Because we tape this thing, don't we? It's on magnetic tape.
No, I don't think that's not a thing anymore. That's
really,
pretty old school,
It's not
man.
on cassette tape. It's not going to be on 8-track. So you can play it in your
We've
in
graduated.
Your car. Well, the problem we ran into is we had so much to talk about that we have part 2 of a Chinwag with Stephen Colbert coming up. And I think you're going to love it because it was a very exciting conversation. And at any rate, that is it for us here at the Chinwag. So long and goodbye from me, Paul Giamatti, signing off.
And wag on from me, Stephen Asma.
Chinwag out.
Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films. Hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein. Our associate producer is Andrew Miller. Original theme music by Luke Topp, with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production. Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Audio production, supervision, and editing by Maxwell Carney. Additional audio assistance and mixing by Jeff Neal. With additional production management from Renee Levesque. Clara Wong is Celestial Empress of Benevolent Knowledge. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.